Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Random Drop, and this week I've put some more time into Wayfinder and I'm ready for my early access review. Now this review is going to be formatted a little bit different, as usually I do a positives and negatives thing. Since this game is in early access, I'm going to structure this in a way of, hey, what feels finished and what needs some working on. If you want to know my early impressions of the game, I did release a video of me playing the beta about a week or so ago. It is on the channel, and there you can kind of get my initial thoughts on the game. But now I've put more time into it, and my main goal with this review and with this whole video was to play through the game and then see how did they mash this whole free-to-play game and try to make a regular single-player cooperative game, as there's a massive amount of items and systems that just need to be changed in how they work and how they're doled out, and then of course how the story is laid out and how quest progression is laid out. That's kind of the stuff I want to get into, so let's get started with the review.
Hey everybody, before we get started, I just wanted to say if you enjoy our content and want to stay up to date with our videos, hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Thanks. So on to the video.
So the first part is, hey, what feels done with this early access game at this point in time? And my overall feelings, I would describe it as the main loop of the game is done and pretty well thought out. So let's quickly get into progression. So like I said, the skins of the game are now things that drop in the world as you progress through it. When you select a character, you can see all the different tiers of loot they have, as these were used to be the different skins in the game prior. And with Wayfinder, how they designed their skins is that you can mix and match them. So it's a head piece, body piece, and then like 2 unique pieces per character, equaling out to around 5 slots. And in Wayfinder, when you find a piece of gear or armor, it unlocks it in your list of different armor pieces you can find. And different slots will be like, oh hey, this one's very defense focused, this one is attack and ability focused, this one is weapon power focused. So it looks like every single set has like its unique identity, and you can mix and match to what you need. Maybe during a fight you need more magic defense and you're like, hey, I need to wear the magic defense item. Or it's like, hey, I want to really stack crit, let me wear the items that increase crit. So these gear items are completely static in how they work and their placement. It's not like Diablo loot where it has like 1,000 modifiers. It's pretty simple. You look at the piece of gear in your list of available gear slots and select the one that you want to use most. So the actual armor isn't RNG in terms of the things it gives to your character. It's very deterministic, but how you get them can range from RNG to very specific things you have to do in the game that are either a secret or a quest in the game. As for where the RNG Diablo-like aspect comes from, that is when weapons come in. Weapons in themselves will be largely random in when they drop and at what level they drop, but also the slots and the gem slots that weapon can take will be randomized as well. The actual base weapon, how it looks and the ability it does is always locked in. So whenever you see a certain weapon, you're like, oh, I know how that weapon works and what ability it does. But the different things you can slot in the gems on that weapon itself can vary quite wildly, and sometimes you get a really bad roll and sometimes you'll get an incredible roll and it just fits your kit perfectly. And another RNG aspect is the echoes. When you kill an enemy in this game, it has a chance of dropping their echo, and again, they go in the rarity tiers as well and giving you stats depending on the monster type. I think it's like Goblin Archer that is constantly giving crit and crit power, and then you can get, the higher the tier, the more crit and crit power that specific gem gives off, and the more energy it consumes so that it takes more resources to slot in. So with these systems in place, plus the talent system in the game, you can morph and meld your character to how you want to play most, as every weapon is cross-compatible with every character as it was in the original game. So you pick your weapon type and you pick the weapon that has the ability you like the most, and then slot gems in it. And there are gems that have boss abilities that even have more abilities and affixes on top of it, to where you can create some wild builds. I purposely played Venomous, who is like a ranged dot character, but I gave her daggers and stacked crit, as when she crits, she puts a debuff on the enemies, and when she hits enemies, she's putting a stacking poison debuff. So naturally I picked a very fast weapon, and I was just like a blender of chaos with her. And eventually I selected the talent that when I attack a poison target, I'm constantly regenerating health. So at a certain point of the game, I would get into a fight and just stand in front of the boss and start blendering and decimate them, which is part of the fun of these games. It's always fun to eventually get to the point where you feel like you're breaking the game and you want to see how far that thing you created and concocted can take you. And the next part that feels done at this point, or planned out and finished, is the campaign loop. I have some issues with the campaign, but I would say how the loop is structured is probably as good as it's going to be, as this used to be a free-to-play MMO, and now they have to take that campaign and kind of meld it to the single-player thing. It's not the greatest single-player campaign in the world, as it can get repetitive at times, but the main loop of going through the overworld, doing a mission that eventually gets you to a dungeon, doing a couple of dungeons, and gets you next to the next boss, and eventually it loops back to the overworld, dungeon, boss, overworld, dungeon, boss, until by the end of the game you have a large list of dungeons and bosses you've gone through and played through. There are some bosses that are in side quests, and you can attack side quests at any time you want. You're gonna hit level cap no matter what you do if you're playing the main campaign, and side quests are there for your other characters, or if you just want to level your Wayfinder rank or your progression tower for more keys. And in the overworld itself, it's littered with little mini bosses and summonable bosses as well all over that you can run around and explore. You'll find little nooks and crannies with secrets with deterministic loot, like for example, this sword skin is always behind this waterfall, and if you know where it's at, you can always go and immediately get it. And for example, like, hey, if you want to get Venomous as early as possible, go summon the worm boss and beat it, and it'll drop her immediately. Other than that, she can randomly drop through the world, or I believe eventually you get her in the main story quest. But that's how I ended up getting her. She was the last character I got, and I made it a goal to be like, hey, I'm gonna go kill that worm because I really want to play as her. But what carries all these systems that are just, for the most part, mostly fine and kind of things we've seen before, it's the combat. The combat in itself is so incredibly satisfying, and when it's popping off on all cylinders, it's some of the most fun I've had in an action RPG in quite some time. And with it no longer be online, there's no more server lag or desync, and it just feels so goddamn smooth. And with the builds and the different characters, things are just popping off and you're blendering through enemies, and it just feels so goddamn satisfying. I would probably describe the combat as near perfect, and it's something that, like, really they kind of just don't really need to work on. And that's what this first part of the video is, right? Is like, hey, these are the parts where I feel like these are pretty much finished and they're perfect, they're great. Now let's get to the list of things that need some work, and the things that ultimately are going to decide if people are going to play this game longer than a session or two. So this next part of the video is what needs work. And the first point, and it is always going to be a point, is quality of life. I believe over the past couple patches in the game, they've been working on this, but there are a few things that have sprout out little issues because of how they've merged the game to this whole other beast. And some other little things are cropping up here and there. One quality of life issue that needs to be updated, or I feel like they should take a look at, is whenever you swap a weapon, it completely wipes out all the echoes, so that whenever you want to re-equip the weapon, you have to go back and slot every single one. I don't know what a good system or fix would be for this, as I guess they don't want you to lock you out of your echoes whenever you're swapping weapons, right? The echoes are the little gems that are increasing stats and whatnot, and they're very important as you get further towards the end of the game. And if you're someone like me who likes to experiment, it's really tedious having to like reslot your damn materia 10 times a day constantly. I wish I could like set a loadout, or whenever I swap the weapon, it just automatically looked for the ones I had on it before, and so forth. I'm not asking to do it for every piece of item, like, because there's like trinkets and other pieces of gear that use the gems, mainly for the weapon, because that's probably the thing you're going to swap out the most, and they're the things that like have the most slots. And another annoyance is like gear items / trinkets don't say if they're equipped by another person. So if you're trying to vendor it or trash it or turn it into a dust, you just get this error message that says, oh, it's already equipped, but you're not playing as that current character. There needs to be some UI updates that literally say like, hey, these are equipped by these characters. and give me the option. Do you want to delete anyways? Yes, no, or something like that, right? But the fact that I have like this long list of echoes and I'm trying to dust them, but I'm just randomly finding ones that are just like, oh yeah, I equipped that on that character a long time ago and I don't even play them anymore. Or this weapon I really want to vendor, it's like 20 eye levels lower, is equipped by this other character and I'm never going to use that weapon again. Things like that. It's just like the dealing with items and managing and character swapping is a lot of like the quality of life stuff I have with this game. One obvious one is there are memories out in the world and in dungeons that you touch them and you get a memory of a hero, but in order to unlock the memory you have to switch to that hero every single time, and it's just incredibly tedious to the point where there's a lot of them I just lost where they were at. I started getting better about when I see one, making sure to switch, do the memory, switch back. But again, it's just like there's no reason for that. Let me unlock it with the character I'm not on and still get the prompt of the other character at the bottom, what they think, or auto switch me when I'm holding R1 to unlock it. There's probably a bit more quality of life stuff I have issue with, but those are probably the main ones that really stuck out to me. If you know any more or can think of any more, leave a comment down below. I would definitely like to see it. Next part that needs work is the campaign. Currently, it's a 2-act campaign, and when you finish the second act boss, it abruptly finishes. From my understanding, they have one more zone to go that they want to add before they release the game completely. So it's like, okay, this makes more sense in terms of, oh, I see how they want to end this game, but it feels like there's this large chapter where we just like jump towards the end of the game very instantly, and it just kind of ends, right? I fought the Reaver King, and that fight was super anticlimactic. Feels like it's not finished, and like the stakes of it aren't there and whatnot. There's no music or music that I can remember. But yeah, I got to the Reaver King and like felt nothing. This is an early access game that happens, but my hope is, because of how development has been with this game, what I'm telling you now is that like, hey, this game is not finished, right? There's clearly a big third act that is missing, and it still needs to be worked on. One thing that may help with pacing and padding and whatnot is they really need to go back and remove a couple of those quests that make you go back into dungeons and it has like one modifier. I think there's like 2 dungeons in a row where it makes you use a shadow modifier on different ones. At least change the modifier to something else, right? So that it's just a bit more interesting and you see what these different modifiers do. But at this point, there's definitely a lot of quests that are just go back into this place you've been before and add a shadow modifier, add 2 shadow modifiers. And again, I believe this is just how it is because of what this game used to be. And that's why it's just like it was very much a game focused on running these dungeons over and over and over. So I get why it's this way, but there could be some pruning, I feel. One thing I want to make really clear about the campaign is that it's very much set up like Phantasy Star Online, and if you've never played that game, it is very much a game where you have a hub and then you go into basically a portal and do a mission in the cave area, or now you're in the forest area, now you're in the ruins area, right? That's pretty much what the whole campaign of this is that you walk and talk to a couple people, then they send you in a portal, walk and talk to a couple people. Campaigns nowadays are going to have ups and downs with like cinematic events and whatnot, but because of what this game used to be, the pacing is very, very simple and very MMO like, right? It's like walk and talk and do the big thing, do a lot of combat. As this game is mainly focused on combat, and again, because of what this game used to be, they're probably never going to fix the pacing of this game, but kind of like buyer beware. I'm adding this to the what needs work part, because if they can work on it, do try to like make the pacing of this campaign a bit better. But I understand if they don't have the time for it currently. But again, if you're a purchaser, beware that it is a very simple formula, and what carries this game in itself is the combat and the boss fights, the loot, the gear progression, and the different builds and characters. The next part that needs to be worked on a bit is the difficulty. The base setting is actually pretty good and decent. It just starts not to make a bunch of sense when you start getting towards the end and end game, as these fights get quite a bit more difficult, and if you're fighting them on either challenging or heroic, you don't get any extra rewards or benefit for it, and you're just kind of causing yourself more of a headache. The challenge and heroic modes do have a bit more health and the monsters are way more aggressive, but whenever you're doing just single boss fights, it just doesn't make sense to like really put yourself through that. Or personally, I need a bigger carrot on the stick to push me towards that, either increase in XP modifiers or loot drops. Maybe when you kill the boss, it drops an extra loot so that, hey, if you farm it on a higher difficulty, you don't have to farm it as many times, right? You can kill it a lot easier and faster on normal. But if you play it on heroic or challenging, they drop more loot, so you have to kill it a less amount of times. Something like that. It's a thing where they should try to revise the difficulties in itself. I personally think that, hey, if you play on challenging or heroic, you get an XP bonus so that your reward tower levels faster, your Wayfinder levels faster, and your Wayfinder level, which is like your account level or your save level, levels faster as well. Because if you're someone like me who like wants to push yourself in content and get further in, it would incentivize us like, oh, it's harder, but I get more out of it. Sure, I want to do that. Maybe if I was playing with friends, we would jump in heroic and challenging. As I played co-op with someone earlier, and the base difficulty is just, it's a snooze fest, right? So yeah, there's definitely, the difficulty needs to be looked at and tuned and try to figure out a good way to incentivize it. I'm up for different ideas for sure, but I just don't think the base just normal heroic challenging is enough. I understand play the way you want to play, but someone like me personally, I feel a little bit torn on it. And again, I'm up for debate and I'm up for like taking feedback on this, but I would definitely love for them to revise it and look at a couple things, because again, I just don't think the way they've set it up right now is just, it's good enough or interesting enough. And that's really what I'm going to get into next. Is the end game in this game is very simple at this time. Currently, the end game focuses on mythic hunts, which are all the boss fights in the game at a higher item level. These bosses don't really do new abilities or anything like that. If you fight them at the mythic level, they will drop better loot and like legendary tiered item, right? The orange items. But there is a quest board where it tells you fight a certain boss and add certain modifiers to it. Fight the spider, add 2 poison modifiers, and fight it that way. And from the reward, you'll get some items you need to ascend your character more, but also, hey, here's an item. When you get 4 of them, you can buy a legendary weapon. And that system, it works and is fine, but it's currently the only form of endgame content in the game. As currently, when you get to the end of the game, there's no real point to do dungeons or explore the world anymore, other than unlocking more items, skins, and whatnot, the collectible part of the game. There's nothing that's going to increase the power of your character anymore. It is only through these mythic fights, which again, I believe is fine. That could be part of the game, but I feel like we're still missing the 2 other pillars of the game. The world in itself, the open world, needs to ascend to a different level or scale with you, or put a modifier on the world or something. And the world needs to change and can't just be the same as when you're going around and exploring. The rewards for killing monsters they're just not good enough anymore, right? There's no way to progress the power of your character that feels fun exploring the world. And then currently in dungeons, you can add up to 3 modifiers, but all they do is increase XP values. They're not increasing the eye levels of the monsters or what's required for the dungeon. So the last 2 dungeons are the only dungeons you're going to be doing, and the rest are just kind of thrown to the wayside. And even then, they only get you up to like eye level 30 items, which is enough to get you started in mythic stuff. But I want to do more than just fight bosses. I do want to run through dungeons and blitz through hordes of enemies. And there's no real reason to choose any specific modifiers either, right? Because they don't increase loot drops in any way. It does drop resources to ascend characters and whatnot, but there's no board to be like, hey, do this dungeon with these modifiers and you'll get this item, or a loot box that'll give you a chance at a legendary piece of loot. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. My hope is that the current endgame is very much a placeholder, and what they have planned for the endgame is a bit more complex and a bit more replayable. As currently the mythic hunts are just not interesting enough. You're just gonna plow through the list of bosses and beat them all and get all the loot, but like there's large sections of the game that you like stopped playing, or there's no new game plus to where, hey, I want to take on my gear and re-explore the world and fight all these things, do all these side quests again, do all these story quests at a higher tier difficulty and whatnot. Just something that like makes people want to play. As in Diablo, Borderlands, this genre is very much built on replaying the campaign over and over and going through these areas over and over again, and New Game Plus is very much a part of that. And it currently, how it's set up, it just kind of, you get to these bosses and you're gonna fight them, you're gonna have fun, and that's kind of just it. Everything else is just gonna be going back to the world and collecting for collecting's sake. And that's all I have for like what needs work. The main thing I care about is the end game part of this game, as the campaign can be badly paced and all that stuff. The UI can be annoying and there could be quality of life issues, but because the positives and the combat and the base game loop is so good, I just want to fight more in this game, do more challenging dungeons, and just play more of this content. I understand it's not going to last forever, right? This is no longer an MMO, but currently what's in there is really lax. And if I were to say like, hey, what's the thing I hope they add, like my personal, a very personal thing, which I think they'll never do, or maybe if they ever do, it'll be like past 1.0, is something that is challenging, but also would save dev time. I don't need like this expansive area world, but a tower that is very much like Devil May Cry's Bloody Palace, to just, hey, me and you, let's go into this tower and let's try to get through it to the very end. Every 10 levels we fight a random boss or something, right? Just something just to chew on that really incredible combat. And that's where all this comes to, man. I just want to fight and increase my power level and fight harder foes, and then eventually get to the point where I feel like I broke the game, and then I could put it down. But right now I feel like I got there too soon, is kind of where I'm at. But hey, what do you think? Let me know down below. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you on the next random drop review. Peace.